There's a turf war going on in Ireland, a conflagration that has engulfed cities large and small and sparked protests and civil disobedience across the land. The conflict, globalists seeking to wrest control of the future of Ireland from native people desperately seeking to protect their nation, culture, and people and recapture their destiny. The two biggest issues of the day, the migrant invasion and the ban on burning turf. That ban being directed by politicians from the EU over concerns of climate change, because burning turf like this produces large amounts of CO2. What no politician in the EU or anywhere in the world for that matter can seem to understand, mass migration is also a massive source of CO2 production. In my last video, Immigration Equals Climate Change, I conclusively proved that bringing people out of low carbon nations into Europe, Ireland, North America dramatically increases CO2 production. So this debate got me curious, how big a problem is burning turf? How much CO2 is that producing? And conversely, how much CO2 are all these migrants who've moved to Ireland just this year producing? And I know the governments are really busy and the media is really busy and they don't have time to look any of this up, so I went ahead and did it for us. Now, it only took me a few minutes. All I did was I went over here and I looked up the average per capita CO2 production for Irish citizens. What's the average? That's the annual production. Here we go, per capita, Ireland. And as you can see, that number is 7.5. 7.5. Okay, now these migrants coming into Ireland, where are they coming from? Well, ostensibly, they're supposed to be coming from Ukraine. So I went ahead and looked up what's the average carbon footprint of a Ukrainian citizen. And as you can see, that number is readily available. And that number is, as of last year, was 4.64. So that means that if we pull a person out of Ukraine and we move them to Ireland, we've just increased their carbon footprint 63%. 63%. Okay? Now, going a little bit deeper, I know that most of these migrants are not even from Ukraine. I've seen many videos where they admit that they're from other countries, and one of the countries that a lot of them say they're from is Afghanistan. So what's the carbon footprint of somebody in Afghanistan? I went ahead and looked that up, and that's right here, and as you can see, that's 0.3. 0.3. So that means that when we pull a person out of Afghanistan and bring them to Ireland, we just increased their carbon footprint. What is that, like 25 times? 25 times we've increased our carbon footprint. Once again, you cannot be saying that you are fighting climate change and demanding CO2 reductions and at the same time demanding mass immigration. Those things are non-compatible. Now, the next question someone might ask is, well, how many migrants are coming into Ireland, right? We got to figure out what their carbon footprint is. We need to know how many there are. And nobody seems to know the answer to that question, but I found this article that said Open Borders Ireland, 120,000 strong migrant surge drives record population growth. So now this article was actually from August, okay, so it didn't encompass this year entirely. And they specifically said in this article that they were saying that it was 28,000 of the 120 were Ukrainians. And we know that larger is much more now because I've seen data saying it's 50,000. And actually a great YouTuber, Count Richard Kalergi. You guys ought to subscribe to his channel. He's fantastic. He just informed me yesterday, he lives in Ireland, and he said that now they're saying it's 100,000 just Ukrainians. So that means we need to dramatically increase this number, right? So what are we looking at? Easily 200,000, 250, 300, who knows? I'm a conservative guy. I like to use conservative numbers. So what I did was I just used some simple math, and I just multiplied 150,000 migrants by the 7.5 tons of carbon that they're going to produce every year now living in Ireland. And just easy math, it came out 1.13 million tons of carbon. That's their carbon footprint. That's the carbon footprint of the migrants, and that will be their carbon footprint from this point on. So until they leave Ireland or pass away or get deported or whatever, as long as they're in Ireland, that's basically going to be their carbon footprint, which is very interesting because when I looked up this turf that's being used, what I found was that it came to about 1 million tons a year. So this big conflict that the Irish government is involved in with turf, right? It's a one-for-one situation. The turf war is basically being swapped for the migrants. And what I'm saying is that if you just had a 1-year moratorium, a timeout on immigration for 1 year at current levels, it would equal all the turf burners from that point on. It would solve the problem. It would solve the problem. So we have to ask ourselves, why isn't the Irish government considering that as a remedy? What's the problem with that? Now, they're not just coming after the turf industry, which they've already wiped out. Okay. By the way, the article said that back a couple years ago, they were using turf to generate electricity throughout Ireland, and that was producing 3 to 6 million tons. And we had to wipe out that whole industry and fire all those people and destroy that whole industry. And really, it would have only been what? We would have only needed a 5 or 6 year moratorium on immigration, and you could have kept your turf industry, you could have kept your electrical production, you could have kept your jobs, and it would have been carbon neutral. And you could have used turf again for electricity, which, by the way, is a natural, renewable resource. Why aren't these possibilities being debated in the halls of government? So now we need to look to the future. What the Irish government has wiped out the turf industry and the electrical production. That's gone. Got to get rid of that. And now they're coming after even people burning turf in your house. They're passing laws where if they catch you burning turf like this in your house, you're going to jail for 2 years. Okay? Amazing. When they could just call a moratorium on immigration for 1 year and it would amnesty all the turf burners in Ireland from now until the end of time. Well, why isn't that a possibility? I don't know. Okay, but they're not just coming after the turf industry. They're not just coming after your electrical production. They're not just coming after you and your house burning turf. What are they talking about for the future? What are they talking about for the future? Well, now they're coming for the cows. Now we got to get rid of the cows because the cows are making a lot of CO2 also, right? So we got to get rid of the cows. This article from The Guardian, it says Ireland would need to call up to 1.3 million cattle to reach target deals. Now, see, the politicians, the politicians of Ireland have signed agreements forcing the Irish people to reduce carbon emissions. But these are also the same politicians at the same time who are aiding, abetting, facilitating, and encouraging mass immigration to Ireland that's producing more CO2. Do you understand that this is an oxymoron? These two things are incompatible. In fact, they're working diametrically opposed to one another. So this article goes on to say, we got to get rid of the cattle, and you're going to have to eat less. You're going to have less milk and cheese, and you can't eat meat. And I found it interesting because it said in here, it says Irish agriculture is under huge pressure because 35% of greenhouse gases come under that sector, and 60% are from cows. Okay, so the next question I think we would ask is well, how much carbon is Ireland producing every year? And the media, they're too busy, so they can't look that up, but we can. So we're going to go ahead and look that up. And here is Ireland, and we're just going to scroll down, and there it is. There's annual production, and what is it? We'll just look at this number here, and as you can see, it's 37 million tons Ireland produced last year. Okay, now this isn't difficult math. I think the government could probably do this math, right? So let's just do easy math. Let's say it's 36 million tons, and what's a third of 36? It's 12. Okay, 12. And what's 60% of 12? That's 7.2, right? I think 7.2. So that means that the entire agricultural industry produces 12 million tons, and the cattle industry produces 7.2. Okay, so that means that we could just have what would that be? A 6-year moratorium? A 6-year moratorium on immigration at current levels, and we could keep our cows, and we could keep our milk, and we could keep our cheese. And from that point on, it would be carbon neutral. And after 6 years, the government could go back to flooding the country with 200,000 migrants every year, right? Now, what I found interesting also in this article is they're talking about a climate emergency, right? Climate emergency. And they're not the only ones. These people in government are talking about a climate emergency. This man here, Simon Coveney, he's talking about there being a climate emergency and we have to take action. We don't have excuses. That's what this article from the BBC, I think it is, says. The Independent, I'm sorry. And he says we don't have any excuses. We have to take action on climate, and there's no excuses for the Irish people. Okay, but this is the same Simon Coveney, exact same man, who is doing everything he can to bring as many migrants into Ireland as he can. Here's an article from the Independent that says Simon Coveney is asking Irish people to open up their homes to Afghan refugees because they filled up every hotel and warehouse in the country with refugees, and they need more. Now, we already showed that pulling a person out of Afghanistan and bringing them to Ireland increases their carbon footprint 25 times, Mr. Coveney. So what is the excuse? You're telling us the Irish people don't have excuses. What's your excuse for not knowing this? Why don't you know this if that's your job and you're going to stick your nose in that business? Why is the Irish government telling the Irish people that there is no choice? They have to dramatically change their lives. They have to stop eating meat and drinking milk and eating cheese. They're going to have to change everything they're doing to reduce CO2 emissions when the government is doing everything they can to flood the country with more CO2 emitting migrants. Here's a warehouse commercial building in Ireland that is being converted to migrants. It's going to be migrant housing. And this man here just walked through there and showed what they're doing. They are building migrant housing there. That's what they're doing. They're converting these buildings all over Ireland. They're converting them to house migrants that are producing CO2. Now, if there was really a climate emergency and if it was really the greatest threat to humanity, wouldn't the logical thing to do, wouldn't it be to stop all immigration today? Wouldn't that be what the logical thing to do would be? So the government is saying that we're in a climate emergency and there is no choice. But we do have a choice. We could just stop importing hundreds of thousands of people and we could keep all of our industry and our way of life and it'd be totally carbon neutral.